Okay. Yeah, I've just got an error saying there was an error loading your app.
So now I have to send a link. We now have a link to our event, to our YouTube video. So I will tweet that. Crap. What is your JChan? There we go. JChan. UTOH and I are having a session, a pairing session on Hypermedia, and Nancy, come watch.
Can you see me okay?
Yep, sorry, quick now. Okay, we're on. Sorry, I'm at work. I'm closing my mail now. All right. So first I want to get a context. So my reason for reaching out. So first, hello to everybody. Is I built this library. So Hypermedia has been a space that I've been involved with for probably 5 years. And let me close my mail. Come on. Crap. And so in particular, I've done a lot of work around this fairly new media type called collection JSON. In the hypermedia space, there's, aside from HTML, which has been around a long time, which actually does support hypermedia, and Atom, which are probably the two well-known formats that support hypermedia, HAL was probably the next big one. And HAL differs in the sense that HAL, there was a deliberate goal of building something with hypermedia. HTML, I would say, hypermedia is baked into the notions of the web, like I talked about in my talk. So it was naturally there, but HTML really was designed for browsers. The difference with HAL is HAL was really designed for machine-to-machine type communication, where it wouldn't just be a browser. The concept of machine you can put in quotes, but let's just say that instead of the payload just getting rendered directly, which is the case of HTML, HAL was designed so that, like in JavaScript, I could have a JavaScript client that would read a hypermedia response. That JavaScript code that is running, for all intents and purposes, is a machine, in the sense that it's just code that's running and that's analyzing the results that come back. And so around the time that HAL took off, right after that, this other format took off called Collection plus JSON. Collection plus JSON is a format that was created by Mike Amundsen. It's a media type. And Collection plus JSON, so there's no Atom plus JSON. So one of the things that Collection plus JSON tries to fill is providing an Atom-like equivalent in JSON. But Collection JSON also goes a lot further towards CRUD management and introducing hypermedia in a first-class way, and even introducing queries. So if you look at the, let me share my desktop here. So let's see here. So I will share my entire screen. You guys see my screen? I should probably hide myself because that's very meta. Let's see here. Are you guys seeing it?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm passionate about hypermedia in general, but the reason why collection plus JSON caught my eye is how, when we think about hypermedia media types, there are media types that basically just add a notion of hypermedia and links, and there are media types that have more of a protocol attached to them, protocol semantics. And what I mean by that is HAL will give you an easy way to just embed links. So if we look at a HAL payload, I'm a little all over the place. This was not prepped, so I'm making this up as I go along. So this is HAL. So HAL provides a really easy way to just take any kind of JSON object and embed links within it. And it introduces conventions for doing that. The main one having underscore links. So you just take any JSON object, add underscore links to it, and you now have a way to be able to embed links. And there are HAL browsers and frameworks that know how to work with that payload. There's also embedded, which is a notion of embedded resources. So you can see here that there's underscore links and there's underscore embedded. Those are both HAL things. The nice thing about HAL is it plays well with any kind of format of data. The negative, I would say, and Mike Kelly probably will disagree with me, or I want to say the negative. I'll say the difference between HAL and, say, collection plus JSON is HAL doesn't prescribe any kind of protocol. It's really up to you how things work, and it just provides a seat for you to add links and hypermedia to your payloads. Whereas collection plus JSON, just like AtomPub, actually has a full protocol associated with it. So what do I mean by protocol? So this is a collection plus JSON document, and collection JSON is really just about list management, lists of things. But the management side is a key thing. So with collection JSON, it bakes in a notion of how you create, how you read, how you update, how you delete. And it also bakes in a notion of queries. It's very self-describing, but it's certainly more opinionated than HAL. But if you're doing something that relates to list management, and a lot of APIs are dealing with lists of items and things like that that they have to manage, it's quite good. And it started to get some real traction. Like one of the big folks that got behind it is NPR. They've built a bunch of stuff using collection plus JSON, and they've actually derived from it. One thing that's different about collection plus JSON, in Mike Amundsen's words, he built it to break the back of serializers. So it doesn't play as well of just take a JSON object. Its goal is not to say, hey, you can just take any object and add links to it. Its goal is actually to say this is a very specific media type that is designed around transferring data and links across the wire, not objects. Now, if you go on the collection plus JSON list, you'll see a bunch of people debate about that, and they'll say, well, one of the things I don't like about collection JSON, it doesn't do hierarchy. It kind of does. Like you can't have, so if you look here, you'll see that this is a collection plus JSON document. It has top-level links. So this is a link that points to an RSS feed for the collection. But notice it also is self-documenting with a link to itself. So if I have a collection plus JSON document, I always know how to get back to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, does collection JSON only work with, I know it's going to sound silly, but does it only work with collections? If you have a person object or person resource and you just want to return...
Yeah, so you can return a collection of one, but that has been another criticism. So you'll see that there's Uber plus JSON, which Mike created, which has been gaining actually a lot more traction than collection plus JSON, and I think it's because Uber solves two things that are not solved by collection plus JSON. So Uber does not require you to have a collection. You can return just one. Uber also allows you to do nesting. So if you look at collection JSON, the idea here is you have items, and you have a collection of items. So this is an item, right? This is an item. You with me?
Yep.
And you notice that the items have a self-link. That's what this href is. So Hypermedia here. If I see this item and I want to get back to it, I can get back to it with this link. And then it has a data collection. And this is where people, even myself, have sometimes found limits, but Mike will say, well, that's by design. So it's really good for flat data. So here you can see that this is an example that's passing friend information. What's nice about it is the way it's self-documenting. So you see I have a name here, I have a value, but I also have a prompt. So this is returning metadata that a client who is reading this, and this is kind of his answer to OData. Like he was trying to say, look, like you don't need to have separate documents and all kinds of magical conventions. You can actually just inline metadata that informs clients about what they're seeing.
Okay.
What this doesn't allow you to do is, like, let's say I wanted to have a contact and a contact has a list of friends. I can't, within the data, inline the friends of the contact. What I can do, which is somewhat of a hack, which is one thing that I suggested, is I could have keys with dots in them, you know, like contact.friend1, contact.friend2. That's one way you could do it. It's a bit of a hack. Another thing you can do, which people actually have done, is these collections can be heterogeneous. So I could actually have friends and their contacts mixed into the same collection that got returned, and I can use links between them. Like I can basically use links to refer to things within the collection. So that's another thing. But at the end of the day, I think it's like if you've got simple kinds of data that you're passing back and forth, collection JSON is great. Where Uber is nice is Uber allows data elements to then have data elements within them. So you can then actually represent richer, or data elements with items within them, sorry. Like you can have a data element that within it has a child, which is an item. So that's quite nice. But anyway, people have seen plenty of success with collection JSON, and one of the things that's really nice about collection JSON, yes, I'm a big fanboy of it, is that it is extensible. So right now, for example, I'm working on an extension for collection JSON for adding file attachments, because that's not something that's in the spec. And what Mike has done, which I think is awesome, is the whole spec is on GitHub, and he's baked in the notion of extensions. So extensions allow other people to come along and say, well, I really want to extend the semantics of collection JSON. They can iterate with the community and get these extensions brought in without it having to be incorporated into the main spec. It might ultimately get incorporated into the main spec. And to give you an example, there are people that have done things like here's one for model. Right? So here's somebody who says, hey, I want to decorate links with a model. So the whole idea of extensions is as long as they're published and they're in the repo, you go through the community, like there's a mailing list and you're supposed to iterate, which is what I'm doing right now with attachments. This one is actually quite sophisticated, because what this one is trying to allow you to do is to actually be able to send files in a multi-part request. Something that's not supported at all today. So I took this one on because we had a discussion on the mailing list a while ago, a little bit of a shameless plug here, and I started to scope out the idea that I could have, well, first we need to talk about the template notion, but basically I could have a data item that has an attachment property associated with it. And this is using a template. So let me get back to the notion of the protocol, because I'm now going off, and which I will do. But anyway, you get the idea of the data and the fact that I can have links.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one of the things with links that's nice, every element in CJ has a name. So the rel, when you start dealing with hypermedia, the rel is really important because it describes the type of thing. But you know, but what name is nice is name allows you to really hone it in and say, like, this is what the specific thing is in the relation to my payload, and I don't have to abuse creating tons of rels to represent those things. So CJ's been very clearly thought out, and Mike has been a real leader in the hypermedia space. Call them the two Mikes. I mean, both Mike Kelly, who was the guy who drove HAL, and Mike Amundsen have been real leaders for the last 5 years around this whole hypermedia thing. So CJ was a very clearly thought out, in my opinion,
Yeah.
design to support hypermedia in a first-class way.
So the attributes that go into the data array, I assume they still have to be documented just like a rel would be.
Well, so one of the things that's nice, though, is collection JSON bakes in the notion of profile. I don't know if you've heard of profiles, but
Nope.
profiles. So you'll read about it in our book if you read our book. But profile is actually really important, because what profile does. So you want to use collection JSON, like you said, but there's items in there. What do those items actually mean? So one thing you can do with rels in general is you can have fully qualified rels. So they don't have to be published with IANA. You can have a rel where the rel is like a URL somewhere that just qualifies what this thing is. And on the other side of that rel, there should be some documentation. As a matter of fact, we actually show that in the book. But what collection JSON allows you to do is there's actually been a spec, which you can click here to learn about, on profiles. And what profiles is trying to solve is to say that we don't want to have an explosion of media types. Like collection JSON is a really good media type, but what I want to do is tell you that when you look at this collection JSON document, you're actually looking at friends. You're not looking at just CJ, right? So it's applying some semantics on top. So profile is something that has actually been, it's not even in draft anymore, it's actually been approved in IANA. And so what you can do is you can return a profile in a header, in an HTTP header, or if a media type has defined that it supports profile, you can have a link element within the payload or use it as part of the media type identifier. Meaning you could return a content type and after it say semicolon, profile equals, Glenn's friends or Glenn's contacts or whatever.
Yeah.
And once you do that, that profile can point you to a URL. So look here at this example.
Yeah.
Right. So this says that I'm returning a collection JSON document, but actually I'm layering semantics of a vCard on top. So this now gives discoverability, where a client can actually be coded to say, okay, if I get this profile, I know how to deal with it. Beyond that, it's just self-describing that if I was to use something like curl or fiddler, I can see the self-documentation that points me to where I need to go. And that's a key thing about REST, like when you read Roy's dissertation, is this idea that messages should be self-describing. But what's nice about this is you get self-description without having to go through publishing your own media type. You can reuse existing media types. Like you could even use JSON, for example, but for JSON, you would have to use a link header. And this is because the spec for profile says that you can only use it within the media type property, like this, if the media type itself says that it explicitly supports profile, which in the case of collection JSON, it does, so you know to expect it. But if I just went and read the XML, like application/XML or application/JSON, I would have no notion of expecting to see a profile. I would, because, just by reading the spec. Yeah. Anyway, the roundabout answer back to your question is the way that I take what we were looking at and I make it so that a client would know what those meanings of those things are, is I basically would return either a profile link in the payload or a profile header, or just return it, right in the content type header, and then the customer will know, the client can actually go to that profile page and we should get some type of documentation that says, oh, this is full name is blah. Make sense?
Yep.
And profiles, so if you read Mike's book, profiles are a big thing in the book because they're really pushing that, hey, we should stop worrying about minting tons of new media types and we should start thinking about taking the group of 10 or so really popular hypermedia types now. I mean, there's Siren, there's Mason, there's JSON LD, and we should start saying, you know what, we've got enough of a base to start building on top of instead of having everybody go and create their own new media type.
Okay.
Does any of this make sense?
Yeah, no, it's getting there. I think hypermedia and APIs, from my newbie perspective, it seems very academic at the moment. I think it's getting mainstream now. I think it's getting much more attention.
Amazon, for example, built their streaming API on top of HAL. GitHub
Right.
actually uses Hypermedia. They
Yeah.
kind of merged the rel into the name, which I don't like particularly, but they absolutely have an API that is discoverable. Once you get the payload back, you can then navigate to the different parts of the API.
I think that's just the key message to get out there. I think there's a lot of kind of gumph over the what is it, you've got the old rest argument and things like that. And I think, as you say in your video, that hypermedia just think links. And I think that the message out there at the moment is quite ambiguous about when you're developing a REST API versus an HTTP API, and you've got that whole argument. You're saying no, you should have a REST hypermedia API. I think a lot of people are just, I've heard those acronyms, but I don't really know what he's talking about. So
the first thing I would say is just drop REST from the discussion. I've done that. You'll notice, like, I even do less of that. Like, I used to be really, because, you go through this period where you're just back then, the only people that were talking about this were people in the REST community. But reality of it is, like, creating an API with linking, I think doing it will get you closer to or get you to a RESTful system anyway over time. But it's not a requirement, and the eyes on the prize is not Hypermedia or REST, right? It's about building systems and what are the benefits that it provides. In my talk that was linked to, right, I mentioned PayPal as a very real example of where they're basically introducing links, so that it's just about, I think the value is it makes it easier for clients. Like, let's say I was introspecting an API using something like Fiddler or curl, which, believe it or not, people like to do. It's easier to do it when it offers me up the links that I can follow to go to the next step, rather than me having to create those links. I think the versioning as well. I mean, look, some people don't believe in it, and that's fine. I mean, my goal the last couple of years has been to say, look, I educate on what it is, and if it catches people and they say, yeah, I really want to do this, then I'll show you how to do it. And we can talk about the trade-offs, but I'm not religious about it. One thing, though, that Collection.json has that's quite nice, and I demoed this recently in a talk, and people react. I can even show it to you. I have our API from the book, and how you can literally. I was using Script.cs to do this. Shameless plug. Using it as like a fiddler. My talk in Urdev is actually going to be on this.
Yes, all right.
How you can actually navigate the API, and people were getting it. Like, they were seeing how I started off with nothing. All I knew was a root URL. And the point was that I was simply able to follow the links that were available to get around the system. That is very compelling, in my opinion. Versus, how would I do that if I was dealing with, a non-Hypermedia API? I would have to basically know all those URLs up front that I have to build.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when those URLs are even applicable. So that's why I think it's more than academic, but it's taking time to move. But I see it really, even big companies like Dell that are really looking at this. So I think it's moving past academic to reality, and the more implementations that are out there, the more it's going to help to get people to move from it being purely theoretical. Yeah. I mean, that was one of our goals in the book, by the way, was to say, let's make this real. Like, let's just show people what this even means, even though it's a pretty simple API or issue tracker, which I'm going to show you, which I'll show you. But anyway, so the other thing that's nice about Collection.json is the fact that queries are baked in. So, like, let's say I want to search for a friend. Think about that instance. So I get a list of friends back. Now I want to go say, it's a big list. How do I search for a specific friend? Yeah. I would have to know, like, how I would do that. But what collection JSON can do is it can actually return to you these queries. Okay, and so with the query, the semantics of queries in collection JSON is you just use those parameters as part of a query string. So here you can see that it's giving me back a query saying, hey, if you want to search for a specific friend, here's the URL that you access, and it tells me the data element that I need to send, which corresponds to passing query string with that parameter, like search equals Glenn.
Yeah.
So this, what's nice is this is per response. This is where this differs from, like, say, the SOAP world, is I can really tailor the queries based on the queries that make sense for the particular individual who's doing the request.
Okay.
And these forms can be pretty free-form. Like they can have 1 to n number of fields. They can be pre-filled even with certain fixed values. And this is so that the server doesn't have to maintain really any state. So it's a pretty powerful feature, I think, of collection JSON. And the last one is templates. So now I want to go create a friend. How do I know how to create a friend? Again, I would have to go to documentation, see what's acceptable. Collection JSON feeds me this thing called a write template. And this template is what I use to create or to update existing information. So it's telling me, hey, you need to supply me a full name, an email, blog, avatar. There have been some people that have been wanting to extend this so that I can specify required versus not. Today, I would have to do that in the documentation. I have no way to inline it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could put it under, like, prompt or something.
Yeah. Oh, hello.
I work with that, aiding me to basically be able right? So if you want to update, you use put. If you want to do a get, it's get. But all that is baked in. Now, if you go over to HAL, HAL has none of that. HAL has the benefit of the fact that you can introduce those links into anything. But all the protocol semantics, those are things that you have to come up with and educate your client on how to do that. It hasn't been predefined for you, which means that with collection JSON, once you find a standard library that supports CJ, you can expect that those semantics are baked in. In the case of HAL, all you'll have baked in is the ability to create links. Now again, HAL has a lot of cool stuff about it, so I'm not beating it. I'm just trying to give you a differentiation between the two.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to show you, I actually have a live, so because of this attachment thing that I've been doing, in order to really work out the details of the spec, I actually have in Azure running a collection JSON web API for friends. So if I do a curl here and I say, see if I remember it, CJ, I think it's attachment, Azure websites.net/friends. Is that right? Okay. Now this is very simple. This is just the friends example. The example that we use for the issue tracker, which I also need to put up on Azure now that I've done this one, there's no reason I shouldn't do that one, is a little bit more sophisticated because it actually has state transitions. This is pure CRUD, and there's no real sophistication from a business logic perspective. Whereas the example we use in the book, we actually wanted something that had state transitions, like the ability to say that an issue has different states, and I can use a link to tell it to go to the next state, which is not built into this simple example. But if you look at it, you can see where the kind of self-description does come in. Like if I want to get the avatar, so you can see here I have a link for an attachment, which will download for me the actual avatar. As a matter of fact, if I open this in a browser, just to drive this home, this should work. There we go. So I just downloaded Mike's Mike's avatar.
Nice.
Right? So, I mean, just taking a look at that simple example, now we've used links before, so like the only difference here is that we're using it in a more standardized way, and we've got metadata around it that really describes what it is. And then if I want to get to Mike's individual record, which you can see here, so you can see it's got data, you can see it's got links. You know, I have the link here, which would get me to that specific entry. So if I do curl, now you can see I just got Mike back.
Yeah. Okay.
Make sense?
Yep. Very impressive.
It works. So if I switch over to the issue tracker example, which I have on here, then I'm going to stop so you guys can ask some questions. So I have written a .NET library for collection JSON, and that was why I pinged you in the first place, Jonathan, which I said on Twitter, but I'm just saying it for the sake of everybody else who's called in. And I've been maintaining this thing a while. And originally it was really coupled to Web API, and I talked with Graham and with Andreas, and they're like, oh, it would be cool if we could use this for Nancy, and we couldn't at that time because it was all coupled into a single package. But I refactored it into multiple packages to make that possible.
Yeah, okay.
So this example, which is available on GitHub, is the Web API example. Let's see where it is, issue tracker. And this one has a little bit more sophistication to it in the sense that it actually has a state machine. So that's the big difference. The other example is pure read-only. Well, it's not pure read-only, it's pure CRUD. It's about as CRUD gets in the sense that all you're doing is creating, reading, updating, deleting. But that doesn't address, when people look at it, the notion of, quote, actions. But this example does. Let's hopefully I opened in admin mode. I don't think I did, so I need to close it because it's gonna, yeah. So let me close this. That annoys me to no end, but I need to run as admin or I can't listen on the port. This is using ASP.NET Web API self-host.
Okay.
Running in a VM, so it's slow.
Amazon.
This is a super fast machine, but I don't give the VM that much because I'm not working on it that much. Are you seeing my VS, by the way? Is
Yeah,
it
I can
showing?
see it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now it says I have a server listening. So let's see if this will work. So it's localhost : what is it, 8080? 8080 slash, I think it's friend. Oh, is it API slash friend? see what the stupid route is here. So, oh, this is issue tracker. That's right. Okay.
Wrong one.
Okay, that is annoying. Come on. All right. Here we go. So what you'll notice is this doesn't look like collection JSON because it's not. This example demonstrates using content negotiation. So here we have JSON, but if you look at the response, it actually has a profile in it. So we're basically saying, imagine we have an issue plus JSON media type. As a matter of fact, we didn't even use profile. I think this returns issue plus JSON. But it can do collection plus JSON. You have to send it the accept header. I think it's accept. I think it's this way. I haven't used and collection. Okay, it doesn't. How do I specify headers? Oh, dash H. Okay. So it's dash H. Okay. Did we get collection JSON now? No. Still did not. It doesn't like the quotes. I know this works when I do Fiddler, so let me just do Fiddler. I'm probably screwing up my syntax here. I should show you the script CS way, but all right, accept. There we go.
Okay.
So now you can see that I got a collection JSON document. And see the profile?
Yeah.
So that's a URL, which we actually have a website, webapibook.net. The profile page is not actually up yet, but it needs to be. But the point is, you can see how I could tell people, okay, you're looking at issues, and I could describe what those issues are. So it looks very similar to the other one. The only difference is look at the links. So we've got a link here. Because this issue is open, I've got a link that tells you if you want to close it, follow this link. And the semantics of the profile would tell you, if they existed, that the way you would do this is if you have a rel called close, you would post to it. Now it's arguable that I could have put name here. I didn't know about name at the time when we wrote the book, and I probably should put a name of close. I could still have a rel of close to fully qualify it, but I could have a simple name so that somebody who's coding against it, once they know the profile, doesn't need to put those doesn't look for those long names. And then you'll notice that there's also a link called transition. So the idea of transition is simply to say that, hey, we've got a state machine here where issues can have different states. The initial issue tracker is very simple, and the back end is like a fake back end that has only 2 states. But if you look at, say, something like Jira or TFS, issues have tons of states that they go through, like hold and this, that, and the other. So the idea of transition is saying, well, if I go to that link, just take it to the next state. You could make this more sophisticated. For example, if you wanted to, you could say that, hey, when you go against this, these links are very simple, and they're already encoded with the ID. If you look at the rel here, these are predefined to say, okay, well, I'm dealing with issue ID 1. But if I wanted to have some other data that you needed to supply, one of the things I could do is use what's called a URI template, which there's a URI template spec. So I could put placeholders in here for very specific pieces of information that I need you to provide. An alternative way to do it would actually be to have a form that you fill out fields. So that was similar to like the queries, One thing that CJ doesn't have, though, is aside from having, I mean, you could kind of use this, but the notion of queries implies that this is a query. This is not like some type of action or something like that. You could imagine CJ being extended to support more specific forms for doing like action kind of things. But anyway, this gives you an example that's not just pure CRUD, where the server is actually feeding you some information that changes based on the state. So whereas this issue here is actually open, this issue is closed. So if you take a look at the links, they're different.
Yeah.
Right? The link here is to say reopen it. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a simple example, but it brings in a little bit more of how you can use Hypermedia in a workflow kind of situation, which is one of the places where I think it's quite interesting. And then if you look at the query here, it's self-describing. So when you access this query, basically going back to /issue and passing its search text, it will actually search for both the name and the description to find things that match. So if I go here and I say /issue, and I say like search equals open. Well, let's just use issue. Let's use another, because I know that that's a word that's there. See if that works. See, I found another issue. Oh no, wait, did that do? That didn't do what I wanted it to do. That gave all. Let's see.
Searched.
Let me see if I did something wrong. Oh, it's because I'm not using Fiddler, right? It didn't. Yeah. Okay. It didn't set the header properly. So if I go here and I say search, is it search or search text? Let's see. Make sure I put it right. Search text. So I was wrong. Anyway, so if I say search text, another. There you go. It just gave me that one issue.
Yeah.
So again, you can see how the self-describing nature of the payload allowed me to be pretty efficient.
Yeah.
Without having to refer to documentation for building up URLs.
Just trying to think how maybe so you've got an API that you put out there and you say to people, there you go and build something on top of that.
Yep.
Do you think they, as a human, read the responses, or do they have some sort of parser in their client which picks up these links?
Well, it starts with somebody having to build the parser.
Yeah.
Right? So like collection JSON, like the example I gave for .NET, I built a parser that can parse collection JSON. So a lot of this is for people that are building the parser, but I think it's also for people that just want to get warm and fuzzy with, they want to get closer. The closer you get to actually dealing with raw responses and requests, just for playing even, investigation makes you get a better understanding of how things are working under the hood. Some people don't ever want to do that. They would just look at it like, hey, I'm building on top of something. I know that Scott Cake, for example, they support collection JSON, I think for Avente. It's an implementation detail. You use their SDK, you don't know anything about collection JSON. They get to use it. They get to benefit from it in their implementation. But yeah, I think it really depends on the kind of library, who you're trying to attract, etc. Another challenge too is sometimes when people build higher level libraries, and we see this with Splunk, is it takes a while before certain features are supported in the SDK itself. Like if one built an SDK on top of collection JSON, there may be features that are not yet available that shipped in the product. So understanding how the payload works under the hood means you can take advantage of those features before the SDK exists or gets to support.
Okay.
That's not specific, obviously, to collection JSON. I mean, that would be anything. Azure, uses its payload Splunk uses like an Atom type payload, but does this make sense?
Yeah, you just broke up a bit then.
What did you? Oh, you didn't hear it.
I think it just went up for a couple of seconds. No, it's not too bad.
So that's basically it. So the real question then is from like an implementation perspective, like how do you build servers? Actually, clients are harder, I think, than servers. And that's one of the things we try to address in the book, is to just give one pattern of how you could do that. But essentially, you need a place on the server where this link information can get generated, and some way to take whatever your domain representation that you work with and turn it into this payload format.
Yeah.
On the acceptance side, you need to be able to. The acceptance side is easier actually than the creation side, because what you send a collection JSON server is generally just giving it the fields that are specified in the right template. So you would create something, or you would update something, or you would delete something. So the receiving side is generally much simpler in terms of the kinds of data format that you're accepting is pretty flat, and it's just like key value. And it's generally just through it's a JSON object, but it doesn't have to be. It's not a collection JSON object. It's just a raw JSON object with key values mapping against the fields in the read template.
Okay. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. So it wouldn't be a actual collection. It would. Then you wouldn't.
For sending, you would only send an individual item. For retrieval, you always get back a collection. It might be a collection of 1. It might be a collection of 10.
Okay.
And going back to what I mentioned earlier about Uber, so with Uber, you could just return an item, and it wouldn't be a collection of 1. You can just return an item. It's baked into the semantics of the format. But collection JSON is built around collections. And a collection of 1 is not horrible, but it's
not ideal, is it? I suppose.
Depending on, well, I'd say it depends. There's lots of systems where it's perfectly fine, but depending on the type of data you're representing, it may or may not be a perfect fit. And I don't think that collection JSON is trying to say that it solves every single problem, just like Atom doesn't solve every single problem. But I think there's a healthy number of problems that it really does solve.
Interesting stuff. Okay.
So in general, like if you think about like our learnings from doing this, from building this on the web API side, but you can also apply this to any language, is like if you think about like Nancy and embracing Hypermedia and Nancy, what I would say you want to do is provide so there's a lot of different theories on how the right way to do it is, and different approaches. Like where do you handle the logic for creating the links? Where do you handle the logic for transforming from whatever the internal representation is into something that can go across the wire? And one approach is to do that in kind of a middleware sort of way, where it's more kind of magical. Like I just give you back a model, and somewhere there's some magic that goes and transforms that into some type of response that can go across the internet with links in it, or across the network. The downside of doing that in a pure middle way is it becomes kind of magical, and it's not always clear, like, unless you really understand how the pipeline works, because often you plug this into some pipeline of middleware to do that. I've become more of a fan of not doing the magical kind of middleware approach, but using more of a service-based approach, where I say, okay, So one of the things we coined in the book, like when we talk about the issue tracker, for example, like the issue tracker has actual models which represent what would be like coming from the data store. And you'll notice, like from a separation of concerns perspective, there's nothing there about hypermedia. There's nothing there about HTTP. And the reason for that is because it doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
This is my model. My model, I think I'm pretty opinionated on the fact that I shouldn't bleed over HTTP concerns into the rest of my system.
No, yeah.
Think of a web API as a boundary, a place where I'm transitioning from the kind of domain-based world into the HTTP world and vice versa.
Yep.
So the pattern that we came up with is an idea we call a state object. And the reason we call it a state, it's a state model. You can think of it almost like a view model. We chose not to use the word view model because it's really overloaded. And we felt that it had too much of a UI connotation to it. And when you talk about HTTP and you talk about REST, it's all about transferring state. So at the end of the day, if that's true, the model, if we were to take a model and model the data elements that would be used, or model the elements that would pass across the wire, it would consist of two things. It would consist of application state and resource state. Resource state is the data that comes from the system, like from the models or whatever you call them. I mean, they don't have to be models. But it's the core data which represents the thing that you're representing. And then the application state is really the links. Those are the things that relate to the client's interaction with the application and where it is in a workflow. So issue state, in this case, is actually an object that now introduces a notion of links. Now, in this case, it's very close to the issue. So you could almost say, well, why don't I just inherit one from the other? But that's very dangerous. Don't be fooled by this example. The idea is that this is something that is completely tailored to what will go across the wire. And in a larger system, there'll be a lot of data elements that appear within the models that I don't want to send across the wire. And if I do inheritance, then I have to like constantly be coupled between the two, and I have to have some special logic to make sure that those things that I don't want to show up don't show up, like attributes and things like that. So we chose to say, keep the separation clearly between the two.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense.
And then for the collection of items themselves, there are also links. Sorry. So you'll notice we have this issues state object. And that issues state object has a collection of issue state objects. So it's issues state, plural. It has a collection of issue state objects, each which are representing issues with links. But then there's the top level links, like the link for the collection itself, or maybe I have some actions that relate to the entire collection, not to the individual items.
Okay.
So these are the objects that will carry the data, the data and links to be represented across the wire in some way.
Yeah.
Now then, you have to think about how to get from an issue to an issue state. And the way we did that is, and you have the link generation, right? You need the links to get generated. And that's very coupled to what environment I'm running in, what host I'm in. So that's where Web API starts to come in this case. None of this, by the way, is in our CJ library. This is building on top of our collection JSON library. So right here, you see that I made this class implement this interface called iReadDocument.
Yeah.
iReadDocument is an interface that ships with my collection JSON.NET library. And basically what it does is it returns an object which is an object model for collection JSON. This is ReSharper, by the way. It's got some kind of bug where I've told this to Hattie. it's not working properly for for syntax highlighting. And now I'm telling it to the world in this broadcast.
Yeah.
They need
Is
to
that
fix
the new
this.
version?
Been like this for me since 8, so I don't know. It could be. I even reinstalled it. I don't know why it's happening. I think it has to do with portable libraries. Collection JSON, one of its packages is a PCL, and I think that's what's the cause of it. And sorry, not trying to bash Jet Resharper. I love it, but this thing needs to.
Come on, Abby, sort it out.
So what happens is the way that we implemented this in Web API is we created a thing called we created a formatter, which I think you've heard of.
Yeah.
Created a formatter, and collection JSON ships with a collection JSON formatter. Builds on top of JSON.NET for doing the serialization, but then it ensures that it writes out the right media type and it works with these object models. So the idea is, in order to make collection JSON more flexible, I made it also support an interface. So it will look at any object that's getting sent to it and say, oh, do you implement iRead document?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do, I'm just going to go and access the collection property, which will return it a collection JSON model. So the takeaway here, I would say to you, is that formatter that we've written for collection JSON, which I can show you, introduces, so collection JSON, the library, which, yes, it's under Web API contrib, but it's not Web API specific. The formatter is Web API specific, but if we look at it, it's under collection JSON client. What this is basically going to do is it's going to say, hey, if you've given me an object that implements iRead document, then I will cast it and I will access that collection property, which will give it back a model that is tailored for collection JSON that it will write out to. So this formatter only knows how to deal with that model.
So this is on
so what the
incoming request?
It handles both.
Right, okay.
So on the incoming side, it looks and says, is it an iWrite document? So if we look at what iRead document and which is agnostic to Web API. This has no server. This is the portable library. And this is the main thing, like if you were going to use Nancy. If you were going to add support for Nancy, what I would say is take this model package. It doesn't just have strongly typed objects. It does some interesting things, like it has dynamic objects so that you can support collection JSON extensions, because collection JSON extensions basically mean adding properties to elements. So I did something pretty interesting where all of these objects inherit from this dynamic object called extensible object.
Okay.
So it's really malleable. Like, for example, once this attachments thing gets approved, it won't be in collection JSON itself, but people can absolutely use it with my library. And my sample shows that, actually, because I'm having to add attachment to it. So it's got a bunch of helpers, and this is a portable library. So this is the package that would work completely for something like Nancy. It also, so if you look at it, so this is iRead document, which I showed you.
Yeah.
And then iWrite document, because you're only sending a template, you're sending up a template when you send up JSON. You actually have to send a thing called template. So if we look at iWrite document and we look at the template, I'm going to. Oh, you know what? That's actually not. I need to work on this. This is probably actually a bug, because I think based on what Mike told me, when I post, I just send a JSON object, but I need to double check on this. So it might be that there's a bug here. Let me just check this out. Let's see. Adding an item. Oh no, you send a template. Yeah, to create it, you send a template in right here. This shows an example. And I guess you actually do send it as collection JSON, so ignore what I was saying earlier on about JSON. There's somewhere where you send just JSON, but yeah. Yep. So anyway, what I would say, and if you look at HAL, like I don't know what your HAL library has, but it's probably a similar approach. A lot of the libraries I've seen for HAL have like an object model.
Yeah, I don't mean,
They just help you build up documents, right? They help
yeah.
you build up the document for sending and receiving and parsing.
Yeah. So one thing I did see in that library was it returns, which I think is a house specification, but you can correct me on this, but it returns a location header when, so say you post a new user.
Yep. Yep. That's standard HTTP. As a matter of fact, in the example I showed you, in the API that I showed you here, it actually does the same thing.
Okay.
That's actually baked into HTTP, so it's not a specific kind of thing.
Okay.
One of the things we did for collection JSON in our library is we actually have a controller, a web API controller called collection JSON controller. I'm not using it here to this library, this package here. You'll see that I have samples. And so if I go into controllers, you see I have this thing called a friends controller.
Mm-hmm.
And the friends controller, you just drop this into your application, it automatically adds support for collection JSON, and it gives you a bunch of overrides that you can implement.
Okay.
So it bakes in the protocol, including receiving the template, including creating the location header when you create something.
Okay. So I mean, in the library that I saw is when you create a new user, the location header would then contain a link to that new user's ID, for example.
That's all it is. Well, it's up to you, right? So the point about using links, it doesn't have to be ID. Like we're taught to think of this world where it has to be, /1/2, the ID in the database.
Yeah.
It doesn't. As a matter of fact, if you look at the server that I was showing you before, that's running in Azure. Let me show you this. Watch what the IDs are that it creates. So if I go to my GitHub page, extensions, I have this live example of creating and uploading a document. So I'm going to put that. Or actually, no. You know what? I'll just go back to querying. No, because you'll see the location header. That's right. You'll see the location header. So I'm going to go copy this curl. And now I'm going to go here. Okay, so what this is going to do, this is using my new attachment extension, but it's posting against a collection JSON API. And passing a bunch of form fields and a file, and it's sending it to friends. And you see the location header?
Yeah.
So that's not an ID.
No, sure. Yeah.
It's a shortening. It can be whatever you want. And that's another beauty of Hypermedia here. You're free to say, I can use whatever I want. I could change it. Tomorrow I could decide I no longer give you JDO because there's too many collisions.
Sure.
And I can do that without affecting the client. And I think that's also a huge aspect. It's beneficial of Hypermedia because if I try to do that same change in a system where you're building URLs, you will break.
Yeah.
Even if you're using my SDK, I can release you an updated version of the SDK. And I think it's a very real possibility because like here I'm just playing around and I could build a client. And you might say, well, you should never have used JDO as the short name as the ID. Mm-hmm. But these kind of things happen. And when they happen, you start thinking, oh, shoot, to fix this is going to break everybody.
Yeah.
And because I'm a web API, I can't expect that everybody's used my SDK, so I can't even necessarily control it. I think that's a pretty, just give me another seller. But yeah, the location header can be whatever you want it to be. What it should be is one of two things. If you return a 201,
Yeah.
It should be the resource that got created. If you
Yeah.
return 202, it could be where the resource will be when it's created,
Mm-hmm.
or it can be what's called an HTTP monitor, which is a URL that I go to check the status. That once the thing is actually created, it returns to me a link that says, here's where you'll find it. It can be either way.
Okay.
But that is not specific to HAL, is my point. This is just any HTTP system should return a location header when you create something.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts looking at this from a kind of Nancy perspective? Like, how do you see this fitting in,
Well,
or can
I mean,
it?
I'm working at the moment, and we have a API built on top of Nancy. It's not released as of yet,
Okay.
but I'm now thinking we need really to either go back and rejig it or enhance it by adding some hypermedia to it, because you know all the points that you point out, today on this chat and in your YouTube video makes perfect sense of why you would use hypermedia. So my next step from there was to try and see what Nancy libraries we've got out there, whether we should have something built into Nancy to maybe do that, maybe have some sort of model decorators which somehow create links based on your model. There's various options we could do. But I'm kind of keen, if I've got this project where I need to get this API out, then I'm keen to look at what the best way forward would be.
Yeah, okay, that's meta. Let me stop the screen sharing. You know what I just realized? I never shared the link.
All right.
I should. It's probably late, but the good thing is it's actually been fully recorded. The beauty of this thing. Hold on.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Oh, somebody found it. You found it. Oh, you gave the Hangouts link. That actually let other people join the Hangout.
Right.
The on-air link lets people watch it on YouTube.
Oh, I see.
Anyway, yeah, so I think a lot's going to... So HAL, if you're just saying you want to add hypermedia, HAL will probably be the easiest way to take what you have and just introduce an ability to pass links back to the client.
Yeah.
You'll have to address the semantics of the protocol, as I mentioned, because HAL won't do that. So you'll have to instruct it's just not going to be something that's baked in. So you won't be able to just say to people, oh, it's HAL, so they'll know what to do. That's the real difference.
Yeah.
With CJ, if I walk up to any system that's collection JSON, I can pretty much navigate it because it gives me a lot out of the box that I can just do. Whereas with HAL, I will have to get that documentation to help me figure out more how to deal with the system, though it can still offer me the links so I don't have to build them up. But in your case, if you're saying, well, we would just like to get a way to add some linking so we can decouple our clients and such like that, at this stage of the game, that might be the right thing for you to do, is to just look at using HAL. I would still like to get a sample out there of Nancy, though, with collection JSON. I'm interested in your thoughts on how to do that.
Sure.
From a Nancy case.
I mean, I think.
Go on. Yeah, go ahead.
I would. I see you've got that friend API sample in your collection JSON repo.
Yep.
I think a Nancy sample would be the best bet, or the first step, maybe to.
Yeah, so one of the last things I wanted to show on that, which I didn't get to, the issue tracker might be a better example
Okay.
because it's a more, I mean, it depends. Depends on what we're trying to show.
Sure.
If we just want to align to the friend example, minimally, that would be good.
Yeah.
Issue tracker is more work. So actually the friend example might be the right way to go. But one of the things I wanted to show you is I was talking about how to do the transformations and how to handle the actual embedding of the links.
Okay.
So the way we do that is we actually have a thing called a state factory.
Right.
And if you the state factory, its job is to go from domain models to these state models and embed the links for you along the way.
Okay.
So if you look here at the issue state factory, you'll see that it actually has this create method on it. I give it an issue, I get back an issue state. And that is the place where I have the seat for applying hypermedia type logic. So here you can see where I'm populating the issue state object from the issue. And one thing that's different is I'm not passing an enum across. I want to pass just a string, right? So status, I'm actually running a function to get me the string from the enum. But then I'm adding those links. And this is where the state machine logic is. I'm saying, hey, if the issue has closed, then I'm going to add an open link. And one of the other things we did is a whole pattern for, so you'll see that this guy inherits from, so he implements issue state factory, but he takes a dependency on this thing called an issue link factory.
Yeah.
And the issue link factory is responsible for actually generating the links. And at the low level, it integrates with ASP.NET routing. You wouldn't probably do this because you're not bound to ASP.NET. We were for this example, so it's fine. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to get at is we encapsulate it using a pattern, link generation. And we even give you some generic functions. So I can say, okay, get me a link for this controller. So like if you look at the issue link factory, you can see like if I do transition, it says, okay, I want to get a link for the issue processor controller. The rel is transition. Here's the ID for the issue. Here's the action that I'm performing. So you could look at this for patterns on building a hypermedia system in general. Like if you want to encapsulate, whether you're using HAL or not, none of this is specific to collection JSON. It's just this idea of having good separation and introducing patterns for transitioning between your domain world to the HTTP world. So this is something that, I don't know, you might want to look at.
Yeah. So I mean, in your controller, you would...
I take it as a dependency. So if we go back to the issue controller, you can see that it takes this state factory as a dependency. You can see here that I'm using the state factory with a link query to create the issue state.
Yeah, that looks quite clean, doesn't it?
Yeah, again, none of this is CJ specific, right?
No.
In the implementation here, it's CJ specific, but it doesn't have to be. Another thing on separation is for actually doing the actions, I separated that out to a separate controller. I could have kept them together, but I wanted to show clean separation. So I have this issue processor. So you'll notice that any of the links that get generated for doing like transition, they go to the processor. You can see here that I have issue processor. Let's see. See, I'm getting a link to the issue processor controller, not the issue controller.
Okay.
So that was because I was separating the issue resource from the actions on the resource.
Yeah.
And again, that was just for cleaner separation, making the code easier to maintain. But it uses the same kind of services under the hood. Like there's this issue store abstraction. That's what represents getting to the issues. That's like my repository.
Yeah.
Nothing about that's hypermedia specific.
No.
And then you can see here where I'm doing some validation. So when you go to do an action, it's very simple in this model. You just do a post against the URL. There's no body or anything because those URLs are fully encoded with the action that they're going to perform. So here
Okay.
you can see where I'm doing some validation, like I'm grabbing this issue that you're trying to perform something on to see if it exists.
Yeah.
If not, I'm going to return to you a 404. And then here I'm going and actually validating that, oh, if you're trying to open it, is that a valid action based on the state of the issue?
Sure.
So you can take this simple example and take it really far. I mean, it's, I think it, and that was our goal, was to say, like, let's get a foundation that can show people where the different pieces are. Now, I think a lot of this is still in the realm of patterns. Like, there are some reusable ideas, like link factory is something that could be reused, could be refactored into a separate library. We haven't done that yet.
Mark Rendell did something with a link.
He's got Hyperlinker.
Right. Was that a Hypermedia based thing?
So Hyperlinker, what it tries to do is, what it does is, like you see in this link factory, how I'm providing a strongly typed way to get links.
Yeah.
Hyperlinker is a library that bakes that in, but I think it relies on routing and stuff. So I don't know.
Right.
You'd have to look at it. I don't know if it would be suitable out of the box for if it has the right abstractions in place. I think it depends on routing.
Sure.
Mark Seaman would be the right person to know that. I think it would be valuable to actually have a link library. This is a gap, in my opinion, that has a pluggable model for how URLs get generated, so that could be reused, and maybe have a strategy where you could say, oh, I could use this for Nancy, or I could use this for Web API.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it would be a good idea. I might even be up for helping build such a thing. But maybe Hyperlink R could just be refactored to be the thing. Yeah. What's nice, Hyperlink R uses Lambda expressions, which is nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could definitely look at that, and it definitely helps. I still like the idea of abstracting into something more domain specific, because I think, like, when you read the code here, for example, for like the issue link factory, having baked in things like open and close, like even if I was to use something like Hyperlink R and I could use it, I would. And the reason I chose not to use it actually is I wanted to educate people on how you would do it under the hood. And every time you're writing a book, you think about, well, if I take this dependency on XYZ framework, am I really teaching people what they need to know? And there's that gap you want to cross. So that's why I chose not to use any of the Hypermedia libraries that were out there, because I wanted to show how you could build your own, just so you understood from A to Z how this was coming together.
So your issue factory, I assume if you had a separate domain object, like a person,
I'd create a different one. So I have an issue. Yeah, and that again is just for separation. But it's not very hard to write these, though.
Yeah.
And all of this, by the way, is on GitHub. So if you go to your guidebook repo, see the issue tracker, and all this stuff is there. Just grab it, along with acceptance tests using HTTP client. I mean, that may be another place where you could think about it from a Nancy perspective. Like, even if I'm writing a Nancy server, I'm sure there are people writing Nancy servers that then use HTTP client on the server to make calls to something else.
Yeah.
So you could absolutely.
I've done that in the past. So yeah.
So you can absolutely use the collection JSON.client library in that context, where you basically are saying, well, I just want to have an API that behind the scenes is talking to another collection JSON API. As collection JSON grows, that'll become a more valid thing. And that, I don't think, Nancy doesn't have to do anything. Just maybe have a sample that shows, hey, here's how we're able to do it. And this library doesn't have any dependency, on Web API that it just brings in the formatting libraries that Web API has, so that you can take advantage of the formatters.
Yeah, cool.
So how would this? I'm curious, because I just don't know, and I don't know if you have anything you could show, and I don't know how your timing is either. But how how would something like what I've shown fit in? I mean, I could see the services being, because Nancy's DI all the way top to bottom, I could see easily getting the higher level services to be kind of baked in. But what I don't know is like the actual returning of the payload, and does Nancy have something in a pipeline similar to like a formatter in Web API where I could plug in and say, okay, if somebody returns this model from their what do they call in Nancy again? It's not apps.
We've got the concept of an I response modules. Yeah, we've got modules which handle the so the routing is side by side with the dealing with the request and the response. So you have an indexer of your methods. Get, post, put, delete. You then specify the URL, and then as a lambda, you then deal with that request and talk to your services, etc., and issue a response. And what you can do is implement an iResponse processor, and therefore overload how that response is going to be formatted, essentially. So it's a bit like.
Does it get access to the model that was returned from the what are there? I know with Nancy's very lambda driven, right? So you define a module, and then you have lambdas because it's kind of Sinatra-like. Do these response processors get access to a model? Can they get access to the model that I returned from my handler or whatever I call it within the module? Do they call them handlers, or what do you call them?
So so handlers, I guess. I mean, the iResponse processor it's based on a pattern that, especially, can you do this and do this? So in that, you've got various interfaces which will say, can you do this? So for a processor, it'll be, can you process this? And it will pass in the media range, the model, and the context. And then if you say, based on, is it application.json or X, Y, Z? If it's that, then return true. Yeah, we can do that. And then in the process method is where you then construct your response. So for example, PDF, out of the box, we don't support PDF, but you can create a PDF response processor.
Sweet. So I think I remember when Graham was building this, because we were having a bunch of discussions about how formatters and how you would support that. So that's great to hear. So then the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, would be to actually, first one would be like build a sample, but the second one I could totally see coming out of this is let's build a Nancy dealing with collection JSON. I imagine from what I'm hearing that would not be very much work, but it would make it easy for people to just plug it in and say, okay, well, if I want to add collection JSON, just plug this in.
Yeah, I think so. Let's think. Would it be there where you did the kind of creating of the links?
Say it again.
Would it be in that processor where you would append the model with the links and things like that?
So we'd have to think about the right way that you want to do it. I mean, my approach has really been to say that in what you call the handler, you populate that object, and that's where those services and other things come in.
Yeah.
And then the formatter that I have, for example, all it knows how to do is say, given that you've given me this collection JSON model that we include as part of the NuGet package populated, we'll write it out properly. That's one way to do it.
That sounds exactly. I think that makes a perfect fit. Really, you could inject your services into your module. You create your model from your database, for example. You then use the services to construct the links, and then you have a response processor to deal with that model.
And what I would do is similar. Well, obviously it's a shameless, obviously I'm saying this because I did this, but I would look at supporting those interfaces, because supporting those interfaces means you can have like an adapter. Like if somebody says, well, I want to support raw JSON and this, one way to do it would be, and depending on where your content negotiation is happening, because like if I do it in the handler, then I have to be able to know, is this actually the media type that the person wanted? So the reason I introduced that notion of the interface is that I'm allowing Web API to make the determination based on its negotiation, its implementation of ConAg on what is the right media type to get generated, and then the formatter just has to know to cast to the correct interface, so that this way, if I want to have, and I don't know how this is handled in Nancy, but I'm imagining in Nancy I could probably return a model and have it get represented in 1 to n different formats based on which response processors I have plugged in. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So I would look at the pattern that we have in the formatter and just map that to a response processor and say, hey, you can implement, if you don't want to fix your handler so that it only does collection JSON, then make sure that whatever model you return implements, say, iRead document. And as long as it implements iRead document, you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could get magical with that and add decorators and things like that to do that, but I mean, that's up to you. But the point is that this way you're not fixing. In the example I showed you with the friends example, when you use that special controller, you're making a deterministic decision up front and saying, all I care about is collection JSON, and this makes it easy for you to do that. And that's another thing you could think of. That bakes in the semantics of the protocol. So you could think of maybe like a base module, maybe, I'm guessing, in Nancy, if there's some type of inheritance model, where I say, oh, if I want to support collection JSON and I'm okay with only supporting CJ, or I want a more baked-in experience, then that's probably a next level you could go to. But it sounds like the response processor would be the first level.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so Nancy does support content negotiation, but you can also have extensions on the response. So we've got a few in there which are already, so you can force it to be JSON, for example.
Okay.
So you could do the same thing if you wanted it to always be collection JSON. You could force it to be, a collection JSON response. But if you wanted it to be, content negotiation across the board, then you could have a response processor, and if it knows, or if it says yes, I would deal with this response type and the media type, then I will deal with it, and here's what it's going to look like.
Okay, so what's next steps? We need to create a repo.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I'm happy to help. I think it'll be pretty straightforward.
Sounds like it.
I think just pulling in the package, and then also making the decision on handling the receipt side. Like, do you want to make it so that, okay, if somebody sends a template, like the only thing they should be able to send if they do application /vnd.collection+JSON is template. That's the only thing they should be able to send. So our format
in the request.
In the request, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could have a handler that supports other media types, but if somebody sets the media type to application/vnd.collection+JSON, then the only thing it should support is the template.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, it's constrained, but there's reasons for it.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Set up a repo and take it from there, I guess. I think it sounds like it'll map quite straightforward.
Is there do you guys have a contrib kind of thing, or a contrib org?
No, so what we tend to do, I think, I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think the opinion is, Nancy is very much a opt-in framework. So for example, I've found a library called Nancy.how, which again is just you opt into that. If you've got a Nancy application, you can add a reference to that NuGet package, and it will give you, the extra functionality it provides. So I think if we add a Nancy collection JSON
Okay.
library, which had a response processor and things like that inside it, should just automatically get included into your application, because Nancy will find that the fact that there's an iResponse processor.
Oh, no. What I meant is, where should the project,
okay.
like, do you have like a contrib organization, or should I put it under mine, or do you want to create it and I'll help you with it? I mean, you know Nancy more than I do, so.
Yeah, I mean, either way, you create one or I create one, I don't think it really matters. But yeah, I think if we put it on one of our.
Are you up for helping to maintain it? It shouldn't be a lot of work.
Yeah, sure, why not?
So go create it, and I'll join in.
Okay, I'll do it now.
Awesome. Yeah, and as far as your API that you guys are building, I'm happy to give some ideas there. But I think if you look at our sample, it'll at least give you some things to think about. And you may say, well, I don't like what they did there. We can do this better. That's fine. I mean, we just wanted to give a start point to have discussion.
Sure.
And that kind of gives an end-to-end. And for that, I would look more at the issue tracker example than the friend one.
Okay.
But I suspect that a lot of the patterns that are there will map really easily for any media type.
Yeah. Okay, well, I've just created a GitHub repo under my account. So github.com/jchannon/nancy.collectionjson.
It's fantastic. Okay, I'll go fork it, and we can.
Cool.
So how do you want to? I mean, I like your idea of the friends sample. We should probably just include it in there. The friends sample is real simple. I mean, we could literally start with the code I have and just pull over the bits.
Yeah.
I could actually do that one if you want me.
Okay.
I haven't worked with Nancy, so it'd be a chance for me to play with the basics of Nancy, and then you can look at it and say that you're an idiot. You should do it. So why don't we have you start to work on the response processor, and I'll start to work on porting the friends sample over, and then initially it will just return JSON, but then we'll connect the two to make it work.
Okay.
That
sounds like a plan. Yeah.
Okay, and as far as like JSON.NET versus Service Stack, any kind of is there any preference in the Nancy community?
No, we've got, so Nancy has got its own iSerializer.
Oh, okay.
But we've also got a nancy.serializers.servicestack and a nancy.serializers.json.net. So
I mean, it'd be cool if we could work with both. So what you're saying is I could write an iResponse processor that utilizes whatever JSON serializer is available. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think you would need to worry about the serializer that's used in your response process. I think further down the stack it would pick up the relevant serializer that the application has got installed.
As long as I can work with it, as long as I can. Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess we'll just have to jump in, and I'll look to you for guidance on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be cool.
But it sounds like fun. I'd love to see this. So yeah, I'm happy to help where I can.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Cool.
Okay.
Does this help you to get a little bit past the academic, or as far as?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I think it's a big topic, isn't it? I think it's not a case of just. Well, then again, I was going to say it's not a case of just do this, do that, and away you go. But then again, in your issue tracker and your link factories and things like that, you've kind of demonstrated that actually you can do that, and it is reasonably straightforward to get set up, and off you go. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like anything. I think because it's still very early.
Yeah.
You're still doing a bit of heavy lifting to get off the ground, and then once you have that in place, like once you have the concepts, like I showed, for example, in the issue tracker, the idea was say, okay, here's foundational pieces. Once those pieces are in place, you can build on top of them. What you don't have today is a good place to go to get the foundational pieces. And maybe, that's another thing to come out of this.
Yeah.
Once we have another example, like the more examples you have, the more you can say, okay, do these patterns really work?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's very much a challenge today. It's like you might look at something like HAL and say, oh, wow, it's cool, I can just embed links. But the hard part is not that. The hard part is actually like how do you design your system so it can support the generation of links and actually really working well in that kind of workflow. And I think you're spot on that is a challenge, but it's absolutely doable.
Yeah, I think maybe it is still quite early on. I think you kind of see hypermedia banded about quite a bit, but unless you're already heavily involved in it, it's kind of a huge subject which seems quite scary, and that there's not a lot of examples maybe where you can just jump in and go, oh, right, okay, I need to do this, implement that, and
well, that's why we did it. But shameless plug. That's why we did the book. So at least there's something broad that's out there now.
Yeah, I think it's something's got to be out there, hasn't it? So the more examples and the more books and stuff like that that's out there, then it's all good. I think the examples is the big. But personally, I think if I can see examples of things, then it helps enormously.
The challenge always with examples is what is the right level of complexity to both illustrate the concepts and not overwhelm people, but also not be too simple that somebody looks at it and says, oh yeah, well, like the Friends example, for example, I feel like it's great for simple data management, but if I look at that and say, well, how would I do a more sophisticated workflow, that doesn't really come out in the sample, but it's useful on its own. But there's always that challenge with what's the right sample to get across the points that you're trying to get. And it's not a magic. It's not like there's a surefire rule, I think, for that. You just have to kind of walk it. But I do look forward to seeing your Nancy blog post once we have this up and running. And maybe I'll actually blog on my library, because I've never actually blogged on it, even though it's been out there like a year and a half.
Oh, really?
So it might be the catalyst for me to actually... Well, I put code out there, and it's on GitHub, it's on NuGet, but I've spoken about it, but I haven't actually blogged on it yet.
Okay. Yeah,
I have written a book, though, that mentions it, so maybe that that helps. Cool, man. Well, listen, thanks a lot for the time. I'm looking forward to this. I really wanted to see this happen.
Me too. Yeah. Thanks for your time.
So, how much? What? Just getting a sense from you. When do you think? Like, what kind of time commitment do you think you'll be able to have to actually work on it? Or when do you see yourself actually doing something with it?
I'm going to try and start it tomorrow.
Cool. Okay. And I can put in some time over at least over the weekend to work on porting the sample into the repo and get it prepped.
Could you send me a link to your the response formatter stuff? Yeah,
you want me to send it now? You want me to just email it, or what do you want me to do?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, and then I'll take a look tomorrow.
Actually, I'll just put it into the message. Hold on. Okay. Let's see. We got the chat. Let's see here. Oh, I see Phil writing questions. Crap, we haven't answered any of Phil's questions. Let's see. Any given API. Hold on, I want to just quickly answer Phil's questions. I'll send you the link. Correct to say that any API has a single entry point, and after that link should stem from it. Philip, if you're still on, I would say that that's an ideal. It's not an absolute requirement, but it is that idea of having a single entry point. And there's also some work around this concept of a home document, which you may want to look into, which is just a JSON document. It's a format that is used specifically for describing the kind of list of things that you can do. And the idea is that you would go to a root endpoint and you would hit this. So Mark Nottingham, who's a super smart guy who's done a lot of stuff around the web, I'll paste this link, has been pushing this idea of a home document. So that's something also, Jonathan, you may want to check out.
Yeah. So is
Um,
that's a
like a menu.
yeah.
It's really like a web API version of a menu is the best way to describe it. Like, where do I go next? What are the things that actually make sense?
Yeah, okay, I'm looking here.
But where it's a little bit, what I would say it's a little bit different is that as you drill into an API, you start getting a lot more contextual. So the home document is really about, hey, I'm at the very start. It's only useful in one place at the root of your site. And you could imagine, for example, if I was in some type of order processing system, then I might have a thing for orders, I might have a thing for reports. And these things may not be as relevant as I drill in that I would see them all the time. As a matter of fact, I might get links back to the home document to tell me if I want to see the vast set of things that are possible. So the home document's a pretty cool idea.
So the home document would contain, so you went to a resource orders. The home document would contain a list of all the links and the possible methods, payload types, maybe.
I mean, it's really up to you. But what I would say is that hold on a second here. Let me just find my. What I would say is that it would really represent pretty broad areas of a system. Like if you think about even domain-driven design, I think it would almost refer to aligning pretty closely with almost like high-level concepts. I don't think it would get very detailed. It's kind of like okay, if you think about navigation as navigating a tree.
Yeah.
It'd be like, where do I go from the root level of the tree? How do I get to the next? What are the first set of branches?
Okay.
And then from there, I can find my way around because, yeah, I hit the root URL, but where do I go from that point? And that's really what
the links essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it can be arbitrary, like what it actually is.
So say you're at the root of orders, and you can obviously create an order, delete an order.
Yep.
How do you express to the client that when you're going to create an order, this is the payload that you need to send in?
Well, so if you looked at the collection JSON example, that's what the read template is for.
Yeah, okay.
If you're not using something like collection JSON, that's something that either needs to be communicated in documentation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty, I think, of collection JSON is the fact that it makes this kind of stuff in. Now, if you create your own profile, you could actually not use collection JSON. You could say you're just using HAL, but you're using a profile to bake additional semantics in. So you could provide inline documentation if you wanted to, or have another resource that provides documentation on how to do that. But yes, that is a challenge.
Yeah.
But it needs to be communicated either inline through some type of linked resource or through just pure documentation like on a website. But ideally, even if it's documentation on a website, through profile, it would be nice to link that so that the payloads actually guide the person there. I would say a good litmus test is literally, can I walk up to your API knowing nothing but the root endpoint and be successful? And that doesn't mean that the API has to offer me everything up front. It may be that the API just offers me a link to documentation, but still, that allows me to be successful without having to go do a Google search. And I would use that as a litmus test. Are you providing enough inline references or metadata to help guide the client, to guide the person that is manually interacting with your API on how to use it? That make sense?
I think that's perfect, yeah. Okay,
so then Philip said, can I use a negotiate pipeline? I think the answer there is yes. Do you think it makes sense to use this for an internal API? Which thing? The home document, Philip? Are you talking about the home document or something else? Internal API. The idea in general? Why not? I mean, lots of internal APIs are web APIs. They're just APIs that are exposed internally. teams are going to have to consume those APIs. So so I know lots of examples of where people do use Hypermedia APIs internally for exactly the reason of, hey, we've got lots of teams that are consuming the API, and those teams are just like external customers in terms of potential for things to break and things like that. So yeah, I think
I guess it depends how big your company is, I guess.
Fair enough.
If you've got,
That's
maybe.
true. I mean, I think the value of Hypermedia in general accrues in larger kind of consumption scenarios. Like if you have an API that's consumed by many different clients, where there are actually different types, like an Android client, an iOS client, where the cost of revving each of those different clients is very expensive. And I know people that is what guided them to using like a Hypermedia style approach. The second is just making it easier for teams to interact. And if you have a large number of teams, then the more self-documentation you have, the more you're enabling them to be successful because the API guides them.
Do you think, I guess this might be an education point from the consumer, but if you've got someone writing a client and they have no idea what a hypermedia is, and they say, just give me the URL, what's the URL to add this to the system or delete this from the system? Do you think it's an education thing from the people writing the APIs as well as people writing clients to deal with hypermedia links and things like that?
So what you're saying is somebody who's never worked with a Hypermedia API and doesn't even know what Hypermedia is probably going to be lost.
Yeah, I'm saying is, if they've been told, right, we're working with this company, they provide an API, here's the link to the API, now we need to go and consume or use this API to put orders onto their system, and they then find it returns all these links that they have no idea.
I think you need documentation that describes how to do it. PayPal's, I gave the example of the PayPal documentation. I'm not at all saying documentation shouldn't be there. All I'm saying is that if I get a response from the server, it should guide me to that documentation.
Sure.
And part of that is an investment for the future. Like as Hypermedia APIs start to become more prevalent and people start seeing them more, then they'll expect, I could just go to the payload and it should guide me to where I need to go. But I think at this day and age, you're going to be doing a lot of educating. Now, reality of it is a lot of APIs are just being encapsulated by SDKs anyway. So then the fact that it's Hypermedia becomes more of an implementation detail, you can absolutely build an SDK that works with a Hypermedia API and accrue those benefits of the fact that SDK doesn't have to build up URLs and all of that stuff. And if you build such an SDK, then the user above it doesn't have to know anything really about Hypermedia. But I would say, any company that has a public API that has SDKs generally is supporting their API as well, because they may not support every SDK client that's out there. Sorry, they may not have an SDK for every client that's out there. We hit this with Splunk. So you need to be able to have walkthroughs, I would say, using
you've got a Fortran SDK?
Well, the big one today is Go. Everybody wants a Go SDK for everything. It used to be Node, but now Node has an SDK for just about everything. But I think you just need to walk people through it and show them scenarios. So you want to create an order, and PayPal does a pretty good job of this. Like you want to create an order, here's what you're going to do. And then you just, the documentation ideally shouldn't guide people to building URLs. What you should show is like, here's the payload. You can see in the payload a link to do X, Y, Z, and to go do it, take that link and follow it. Versus, and this is kind of where Swagger comes in. Like Swagger is a popular format now, but Swagger is really about making it discoverable how to create the URLs, but it's still ultimately coupling the clients to creating URLs. That's kind of the difference.
But I guess it gives, if you educate them and say don't worry about the URLs, it still provides good documentation on the payload and information like that. And one thing actually that I've been working with Christian Lang on is a Nancy Swagger implementation.
Gotcha.
which we've actually got in the API that I'm building with my company. We're
Okay.
using that to document it.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to bash Swagger at all. I still have questions of how well Swagger works for somebody who's actually building a Hypermedia API,
sure.
um, because it tends to really lean people in a direction of, okay, yeah, you're going to build URLs, and we're going to tell you how to do it and what each of those URLs mean. I mean, the
Yeah,
home document tells you how to build a level, to get to the next level, but after that, you're just navigating, ideally. So there's probably some parallels between Swagger and a home document, but the difference I would say is that a home document is not mapping out every single link you could create in the system.
yeah,
It's really dealing with high-level areas that make sense for you to go to next, to
yeah.
then start kicking off hypermedia type workflows. Um, but
Right.
and to be fair, I haven't done a ton of work with Swagger, but I've looked at it, and I can see that it has some parallels with the home document, but a lot more fine-grained, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's probably built around still the idea of here's the URLs, here's the payloads, go hit our API.
Yeah, it's a
Not,
more RPC-ish. I mean, it's
yeah,
not fully RPC because you could still have resources with get put post delete kind of thing, but
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I think that it's definitely gained traction. So there's no doubt that Swagger's gained traction. And then there's another one which is really investing more deeply, I think, in trying to take on the hypermedia concept is like RAML, which is by MuleSoft.
right,
They're also pretty popular. So the three main ones right now for documentation, and I can send you a link on a blog post on this, is Swagger, RAML, and Blueprints. And so
okay,
both API Blueprints and RAML are looking at kind of how does hypermedia fit, whereas I think Swagger is just not seeing that it's enough momentum around it, or it's not the problem that Swagger is trying to solve.
yeah,
So that might be something to look at, is to look at API Blueprints and look at RAML.
yeah, sure.
But, yeah, I'll send you a link on those too. Let's see. Sure, Phil. Hope it was helpful. I know it was a bit all over the place, and yeah, it was very very ad hoc, spontaneous kind of thing. All right, so this is RAML. The plus side, I would say, is that that's one of the cool things about the world we live in now. That you don't have to go through a lot of monotony to just
Yeah,
whip something like this up. So yeah, so this is RAML and API Blueprint, which are also trying to solve the same problem, I think, as uh, Swagger, but in a different way.
well, I think I've seen the API blueprint one before, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, Ken Lane is a great guy to follow, apievangelist.com, and he does a lot of posting on these different formats. Ken has been, so just to give you an idea, like this whole API thing and even hypermedia is taking off even in government. And
right.
Ken has been one of the people that's been kind of at the center of that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he was reporting to I think he was reporting to like the CTO of the president, helping out with kind of government API stuff. If you mind his blog, he's got a lot of really good stuff about who's doing what. If you're also, another recommendation I would have for you guys is consider joining the API Craft Google group.
Right.
In the old days, if you wanted to discuss APIs, your only option was the Rest Discuss list. Since then, the API Craft Google group has popped up, which Apogee are big kind of supporters of. But that group has very pragmatic discussions about APIs, and some people are building hypermedia, some people are not, but it's a good place to get plugged in on. And Mike
Okay.
Amundsen runs two Google groups, one on collection JSON specifically, We're having a bunch of discussions right now about that attachment extension I showed you earlier.
Yeah.
And another one on hypermedia. So that place is like, hey, if you want to talk about hypermedia, everybody who's in that group, and it's a sizable group, are all building hypermedia APIs from social to enterprise.
Cool.
So that would be, let me share a link to those as well.
Yeah, found the API craft one.
Oh, okay, cool. Hypermedia Google group. Let's see, this is it. Mike's group. I think it's this one, Hypermedia Web. Yeah, this is it. The cool thing I think about the Hypermedia group and API Craft is there's a lot of people there that are actually treading the path now and looking for advice on how to do stuff.
Yeah.
And in the Hypermedia one, it's completely focused on people that are trying to do this with a Hypermedia API, whereas API Craft is kind of a mix.
Right.
But they're both really good resources. I found even years ago, 5 years ago, when I first started to really try to get my head around this space, that using the mailing lists, finding the right ones, is a really great way to go beyond just theory to talking to people that are really doing this and sharing their experiences.
It's odd to think that you've been doing that for 5 years, yet it's possibly still not that mainstream type of.
But it's a lot further than it was when I started.
Yeah.
When I started, it was restricted to about 100 people in like the Rest Discuss list. Now we have companies like Microsoft, Office Link team has a Hypermedia API that's kind of based on HAL, and they're servicing millions of I think they use it for their on-premise product. Like if you install Link Server, it has a Hypermedia API, but that's significant.
Yeah.
And PayPal, like that's a really world-class. Well, it's a big service.
Doesn't eBay do it as well?
eBay owns PayPal, yeah. I think they are as well. So it's definitely, I would say the bar has significantly moved. Before, when I first started and we started doing the work on Web API, our discussions on Hypermedia in the Microsoft space were always outward. It was always us educating and talking, here's what this is. Now we see a lot more people coming and saying, we're trying to do this, we're doing this, and these are the problems we're running into. These are where we're not finding Web API is sufficient. I'm not at Microsoft anymore, but I'll still say we, as in a community.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to get going, but so I need to get some work done. But this was really cool.
Yes.
And I look forward to us taking this forward.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be good. Oh, you still there? Hello?